Let's begin in China, the most intense war zone, where the method of procuring comfort women was at its most brutal. The year is 1943. You have just turned 14. Your door's kicked open. You're asleep in your bed when the sudden sound of splintering wood changes your life. The men in uniform offer no pretense of kindness, just sinister smiles as they walk straight toward you. In the heat of the war in China, the Japanese military's method of acquiring women was the direct and savage method of violent abduction. A bayonet flashes before your eyes. You are dragged from your bed by Japanese soldiers and bound with rope. Beside you, your mother tries helplessly to stop them, her cries of panic filling the air. Perhaps they found her too noisy, so they stabbed her to death. You weren't recruited. You were seized. No different from the chickens kept in the yard. You're thrown violently onto a truck and taken to the army. On the truck, you hear stories. After invading Shanghai, the Japanese army stripped, abducted women naked in public, and tattooed numbers on their shoulders. Soon, the same happens to you. Your name is taken from you, replaced by a string of digits, a designation. From this moment, dignity is gone. You are taken to a place surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. They call it a comfort station. It is a place of violence, imprisonment, and sexual assault, divided into dozens of rooms. These rooms are usually tiny and dark. Many have only a simple bed, some just straw on the floor. The nightmare begins on the opening day. You and the other girls are forced to line up, inspected like livestock by the visiting officers. Soon, soldiers, holding tickets purchased from military headquarters, form a long line outside your door. You have become a commodity with a price tag. The first soldier stumbles in, reeking of alcohol and leering. You scream and struggle with all your might. Your nails scratch bloody marks on his face. Your teeth bite down hard on his outstretched hand. Your resistance is met with a beast-like roar. He throws you to the ground, his fists raining down on your face and body. You taste the metallic tang of your own blood. Then he unbuckles his belt. The metal buckle strikes your skin, each blow searing like a hot iron. You curl into a ball, but he doesn't stop. Instead, he uses his military-booted feet to kick you violently in the abdomen and ribs. You hear the sharp crack of a bone breaking, and the intense pain makes you black out. Perhaps it's a blessing. At least, you survived this one. But is it a blessing? When you regain consciousness, the rape is over. However, the next soldier with a ticket is already waiting impatiently outside the door. A new assault begins. Your life becomes an endless repetition of this, day after day. According to survivor testimonies, the number of men range from a dozen to as many as 70 or 80 per day. Your period doesn't stop it. Being sick doesn't stop it. Fortunately, you are forced to undergo a weekly STD check. But do you think this was out of kindness? No. One of the purposes of the comfort stations was to prevent the large-scale spread of venereal diseases among soldiers to maintain combat effectiveness. They conducted strict physical examinations on the comfort women, not for your health, but for fear of their soldiers getting sick. The military doctor probes inside you with cold instruments. The process so rough it leaves you bleeding. If a disease is found, they inject you with the toxic Injection 606, an arsenic-based chemical that causes agonizing, burning pain. Those who become gravely ill are abandoned, killed, or left to die. The next day, survivors must continue to receive soldiers. You seize a chance and escape, but you are quickly recaptured. You are caught 3 times, and you escape 3 times. Each time, the torture you endure is worse. Your body is completely destroyed. Multiple fractures, severe deformities, and lifelong infertility. You are still alive, but every inch of your soul died in that comfort station when you were 14. While you were imprisoned in that station in Shaanxi, you didn't know that your suffering was part of a tragedy engulfing women across Asia. China, where you are, had the highest number of victims, with at least 200,000 women forcibly conscripted. Elsewhere, this crime was unfolding in different forms. On the Korean peninsula, the violence was cloaked in the hypocrisy of colonial rule. A girl named Kim Hak-sun was not abducted from a battlefield, but was lured by the lies of the colonial authorities. The Japanese military uses colonial machine in Korea to systemically send large numbers of young women to various war zones, under the pretext of recruiting nurses or factory workers. They applied, filled with hope for the future, only to find themselves trapped in hell. This was a more insidious form of violence, exploiting poverty and deception, turning the state apparatus into the most efficient human trafficking tool. An estimated 100,000 to 200,000 Korean women were conscripted this way. In the Philippines, abduction was a tool of daily terror against civilians. Soldiers often kidnapped women directly from their villages. The violence wasn't confined to the front lines. It seeped into the daily life of every town. Any girl could be snatched on her way to the market or the river. For a 14-year-old girl named Estelita Dai, the nightmare began on an ordinary day when she was kidnapped by Japanese soldiers at a market. She was fortunate to survive. These Filipina survivors were later given the respectful title, Lolas. In the Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, the Japanese military not only enslaved thousands of local Indonesian women, but also extended its claws to the Dutch and other European women held in internment camps. A girl named Berta Colfinus was not a direct victim, but witnessed it. Japanese soldiers burst into their camp, demanding 15 Dutch female prisoners. The adults' protests were useless against the threat of military swords. In the end, 2 older women stepped forward to take the place of 2 girls, who were only 14 or 15. Regardless of how you ended up in this place, you were all given the same deceptive name, comfort woman. This term, created by the Japanese government, was intended to use comfort and solace to mask the brutal reality of sexual slavery. But your true identity was later formally defined by the UN Commission on Human Rights in 1995 as military sex slaves. A classified document from the Japanese Intelligence Department to the Army Ministry at the time revealed the true purpose of all this. Possessing Chinese women will nourish the ambition to possess China. In their view, you were nothing more than a psychological weapon for the Japanese soldiers, intended to sustain their will to invade. By possessing the bodies of women from the conquered nations, this was not a temporary arrangement by the military, but a national policy developed through multiple high-level meetings. This policy was fully implemented, closely tied to 2 Class A war criminals, Yasuji Okamura and Iwane Matsui. Particularly after the Japanese military committed mass rapes during the 1937 Nanjing Massacre in China, the High Command believed that establishing legal rape centers controlled by the army was an effective solution to the problem of military sexual violence. The place where you were held was just one node in this vast network of enslavement. The war ended, but your war did not. You carried the heavy physical after-effects, chronic pain, permanent injuries, and incurable STDs back to your hometown, only to be met with no sympathy or comfort. The nightmares of the war haunted you for life, leaving you to suffer from PTSD, depression, and recurring nightmares. Even crueler was the trauma inflicted by society. Because of this disgraceful experience, you were often discriminated against by your own family, ostracized by neighbors, and stigmatized by society. This societal demand for female chastity, rooted in traditional patriarchy, turned the victims into the ones to be blamed. To survive, you, like the vast majority of survivors, chose to bury this humiliating history deep in your heart. The words of one survivor echo the shared sentiment. It's been so many years. Just let it rot inside me. This silence, lasting half a century, was not forgetfulness, but an agonizing burden you actively bore. Then, on August 14, 1991, Kim Hak-sun of South Korea bravely stepped forward, becoming the first victim in the world to publicly testify about her ordeal. Her testimony was like a lightning bolt tearing through the dark curtain of history, inspiring thousands of other survivors, including you. In 1992, you decided to be silent no longer. You became the first survivor in China to publicly stand up and testify to the Japanese military's atrocities. You began the long road to justice, traveling to Japan multiple times, showing your scarred body in court, demanding an apology and compensation. Yet, the Japanese government's response has always wavered between disingenuous apologies and stubborn denial, full of evasion and contradiction. In 1993, to quell international opinion, the Japanese government issued the Kono Statement, acknowledging for the first time the forced recruitment of comfort women and offering an apology. However, this statement was never formally ratified by the Diet and seemed more like a temporary measure. 2 years later, the Japanese government established the Asian Women's Fund, attempting to use atonement money, from private donations to replace state-level legal compensation. This attempt to convert a national responsibility into a private handout was resolutely rejected by you and the vast majority of survivors. What you demanded was never charity. It was a formal apology and legal compensation from the state, based on international law. With no hope for justice in Japan, the struggle moved to the world stage. Two UN reports, the 1996 Kumaraswamy Report and the 1998 McDougall Report, became critical breakthroughs. The reports definitively classified the comfort woman system as military sexual slavery and legally affirmed the inescapable responsibility of the Japanese government. Meanwhile, a world-shaking protest was underway. Starting on January 8, 1992, South Korean survivors began gathering every Wednesday in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul, demonstrating rain or shine. This Wednesday demonstration continues to this day and is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest-running protest rally in history. In 2011, on the 1000th demonstration, a bronze statue called the Statue of Peace was erected in front of the embassy. She sits with clenched fists, gazing steadily at the Japanese embassy, symbolizing all the victims whose youth was stolen by the war and their indomitable will. And yet, in the face of this symbol of peace and silent accusation, the Japanese government has had the audacity to demand the statue's removal, putting continuous pressure on this and other memorial statues around the world. This attempt to forcibly erase historical memory is, without a doubt, a second assault on the victims, making their so-called apologies seem all the more pale and empty. A Japanese friend once told me that in school, they never learned what Japan did to other Asian countries. They only learned what the Germans did. Yet their attitudes are completely different. Germany might say, "We are deeply sorry for our war crimes." Japan just looks blank and asks, "What are war crimes?" The survivor I've been calling you was named Wan Aihua. She's old now, and her sisters in suffering are passing away, one by one. In mainland China, as of 2022, only 12 survivors remain. In Taiwan, the last publicly identified Ama passed away in 2020. The death of every survivor means the loss of a living witness to history. The reason I tell their stories is to carve an indelible mark on the wall of history. Please, do not forget them. Do not forget these women who were stripped of their freedom and whose dignity was trampled. War may destroy life from a position of power, but it must never be an excuse to torture humanity and take pleasure in the torment of women. In that dark corner of history, these most basic human rights were utterly crushed. What was taken from them was not just their physical freedom, but their very qualification as human beings. If you appreciate deep dives into unsettling dark history, please click subscribe and leave your thoughts on the comfort women issue. I'm always willing to listen to more true memories. Good luck and goodbye.